Again. Okay, and let's see, share screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so anyway, this is the Museum of Jewish Heritage. Obviously, you know that. But we're gonna move ahead a little bit and want to talk about sort of the what, and the name of this tour is Meeting Hate with Humanity: Life During the Holocaust. But I want to just talk about, first of all, a little bit what led to the Holocaust. And there's a lot of things that we could point to, but one thing that I think is really important is the social and economic crisis that was going on in Germany in the interwar period. So stop me if I'm being too basic, but there were that Germany lost World War I, although before it lost, it was actually doing really well. It had made a lot of conquests, certainly in Eastern Europe, in Poland, and so it was kind of a shock when they lost the war, when things collapsed at the very end of the war. And in place of the kind of fairly authoritarian state that was there was a republic that was a democracy that was established, the Weimar Republic, but they were beset with a lot of problems. One of which was hyperinflation, meaning that the money, and these are what we're looking at now are German banknotes from the Weimar Republic, meaning that the money very quickly lost value. And that meant that you could make huge amounts of money, but since it wasn't worth anything, you could still not buy anything. You couldn't buy food, you couldn't put food on the table for your family, and so on. And this is just one of the issues. These again are the banknotes. You had a tremendous unemployment from the soldiers who were coming back from the front, plus the very great disappointment. And there was also this rumor that one of the reasons that Germany lost was the stab in the back, that somehow that the Jews had conspired with the communists or whoever, and caused Germany to lose the war. So this is the context, part of the context anyway, of the interwar period. We'll take a look here. So you see this pad here, everybody see this? That the money is so worthless that it's used for scrap paper, right? And we have another picture of a woman using money for fuel, because it's literally, it's worth less than kindling would be. So the Germans were looking for somebody who could take them out of their trouble, who could lead them, and the society was very divided. There were, right-wing nationalists called the Freikorps. There were, the emergent Nazi Party. There were communists, plus also what we would consider more mainstream people. But this is the context that led up to the rise of the Nazis. Was this economic, but definitely also social distress that Germany was going through in the interwar period. And I am going to take advantage of my cursor to move it ahead a little bit quicker. Okay, so we're going to take a look. So the Nazi Party, came to power in 1933. All right, it wasn't that they won the election exactly, but their party in the 1932 election won the largest number of votes. So the president of Germany, Paul von Hindenburg, appointed Hitler to be the chancellor of Germany. And honestly, people thought that Hitler was such a lunatic that he wasn't going to survive, and it was just going to, it was going to be a passing thing. But as we know, it really wasn't. So a big part of the Nazi platform was obviously to regain dignity, German dignity and so on, and rearm Germany, but also was to fight against the Jews. And I think that Germany probably, wasn't really more anti-Semitic than many other countries at that time. If we look at, for example, the United States, in the 20s, you had Henry Ford, who republished the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about how the Jews have conspired to control the world. So I don't think that Germany was any worse than other countries when the Nazis came to power, but it's a lesson for us. Anyway, let's take a look at this book here. This book is called The Poison Mushroom. I hope you can all see it. You all see the caricature, right? Everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to take a look. We're going to thank you. So we're going to look at some of the pages inside. This is a children's book. Okay.
Oh, wow.
It's pretty well illustrated, by the way. So here, this is kind of an amazing image. So take a look. This is an image in school, right? And I'm sure these things actually happened. I want to go back a little bit, and I can. The Nazis had this idea that well, first of all, that race was very important, right? That there was the Aryan race, right, which was the most superior of the races, and then below that, the different races were arrayed, in descending order. And one of the races that was a very dangerous race was the Jewish race. The Nazis were also very big in eugenics, this idea that you could somehow breed a superior person, right? So anyway, part of this conception was that you could look at a person and determine who they were by looking at them, right? Which, the truth of the matter is that there are Jews who are blonde and blue-eyed, and there are people who are not Jewish who have traditional-looking Jewish features. So it's not science, but it was kind of influenced in a little bit by this kind of Darwinism that somehow the genetics could be brought to bear on this stuff. Anyway, so there's an image from the book. I don't know why it goes back to the front cover, but we're gonna move along a little bit. Take a look at this image here. Right, so the Bourse is the German term for stock market, right? And we'll go back a little bit. So you see this Jewish caricature, right? A figure sitting on top of a bag of Geld. Oops, sorry about that. Geld, you see that? Right, in front of the Bourse, right? The Jews control everything. They control the stock market, okay? And you can see these kind of scary Jewish figures in the background. Okay, so again, these are the kinds of stereotypes, but this is something that was promoted to children. And I don't think it's part of this PowerPoint, but one of the artifacts that we used to have, we don't have it anymore, was a game called Juden raus, Jews out. And the point of the game was to kick the Jews out of the German city. This kind of propaganda ultimately has an impact. I have a friend who's a German Jew. He lives here now, and he came after Kristallnacht. And he said that he remembered in Germany that the old people hated the Nazis, but the young people were brainwashed. And we can sort of see why. I want to share with you. Everybody following me so far?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, good. I want to thank you. I want to share with you a couple of clips. So this is a clip from a woman named Molly Blatt, and she's going to talk about how she felt. Okay, and I hope that you can hear it. If you can't hear it, I have to go back and reset up the Zoom. It'll only take me a second, but tell me if you can hear. There we go.
No.
No? Okay.
No.
All right. Okay, so sorry about that. All right. Now let's see here. I have to share the sound. Okay. And there we go. Okay, we're gonna just go back and let me know if it works now.
About 1934,
Yeah.
they
Yes.
introduced a new subject. It was called racial science. We were taught about the Aryan look, the kids had to learn that the good Aryan look, with the blue eyes, the blonde hair. Well, some of the things that I recall that were very painful at that time. I went to school from first grade on. I went with a girl a blonde girl who was my best friend. We sat next to each other.
A Jewish girl? Or
No, a Christian girl.
Christian girl.
And we were best friends. Her parents had more time than my parents, so I used to go on outings with them. We learned swimming together. And then when we went to the middle school, she would pick me up at my house. We would walk together. Well, Hitler came into power, and this girl joined the German Hitler Youth organization. And she wouldn't look at me anymore. She simply, when I passed her in the street or saw her in school, I was air, and I would get a pain, actually a pain in my chest when I would see her. That was bad. At that time, children like that would even report their parents.
So let's take a moment and unpack that a little bit. I would like I'm interested in hearing your reactions and what you would think about her experiences and how that relates to our topic.
The children really had no one to correct their thinking if it came through school and
Right.
and probably their religious organization as well, whatever that was.
Could be.
And
But
after
go
a
ahead.
while, their parents were afraid to ever correct them.
Right. That's correct. That's exactly what Molly was saying at the very end, that, such children like that would turn in their parents. So think about this, that the state is somehow overruling the parents. And what about how Molly felt? How about what happened to her all of a sudden?
She becomes, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. So
No, she just becomes more isolated and more, I mean, she's feeling it as well as it's happening to her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So think about it. Go ahead.
It's like I shouldn't even be comparing, but Mean Girls. Now, Mean Girls can come in any gender. Now, there's that expression about Mean Girls in school, and Molly became invisible. There was her best friend, and she got dropped. So
right.
She and many others.
Correct. So there's this concept called the circle of social obligation, right? That if you're walking in the street and you see somebody who needs help, is that person within your circle of social obligation or not? And Molly goes from being within that circle to outside. That she all of a sudden becomes an outsider. And to me, it's kind of terrifying to think about how, overnight, people who are your friends are no longer your friends, right? So this little clip is pretty moving to me, and it's also interesting to think about how this society so quickly could change, right? Anyway, let me go on, but thank you for your comments. So I want to show you another clip. So Molly is a Jewish girl. I want to show you a clip of somebody who was Afro-German. His name is Theodore Michael. It's really short. It is in German, I have to warn you, but there are subtitles. Okay, so here we go. I hope we're going. Let's see. There we go.
We're not hearing.
There's no sound yet.
Okay.
Well, there should be sound soon. Okay, let's give it 2 more seconds.
Also ich war ja in vielen Schulklassen, aber es war nie eine feindlich gesinnte Stimmung, war nie. Sie veränderte sich allerdings, als die Nazis an der Macht waren und man nicht das Gleiche machte, das alle anderen machten, nämlich in das Jungvolk der Hitlerjugend zu gehen. Nicht? Da wurde ich ja verwiesen.
Okay, so that it's a really short clip there, but I hope that you were able to get. So here's a guy. He grows up in Germany, right? He's black, but he's rejected from society. He was somewhat accepted before the Nazis came to power, but once the Nazis come to power, he's rejected. He's sent to a labor camp. All right, and again, it's another example of uh, the racial kind of, it's not just racial, but the racial hierarchy and the racial prioritization that the Nazis are doing. I mean, they also had a big campaign against gay men, especially. They campaigned against the Roma. It's not just Jews, although arguably Jews were their biggest target. So anyway, by the way, any questions so far? Okay, good or bad, but I want to show you some more stuff. So I also want to talk a little bit about Jewish response to this. So when Hitler comes to power in 1933, the Jews are kicked out of the civil service and they're kicked out of clubs, right? Kicked out of public schools. And then actually, I believe in 35, with the Nuremberg laws, their citizenship is revoked. Okay. And there are efforts actually to try to get Jews to emigrate, but as you know, there weren't really many countries that were willing to take Jews. The United States at that time had very strict quotas, and the quotas. So from Germany, for example, if I recall correctly, that the State Department wanted no more than 7% of the quota to be fulfilled. So the quota itself was small. Let's say the quota was 10,000 people per year, and they only wanted 7% of that, which is what, 700 is a very small number. So it was really hard for people to leave. But Jews definitely did respond, and I think that that's important. So I want to show you a few artifacts that relate to that, to the Jewish response to the rise of the Nazis. So we're going to start with this one here, which is a sports blouse. Let's see if we can move this along a little bit. There we go. So this is a pretty cool artifact. There were teams, just as there were German teams, there were Jewish teams that were developed. There were Jewish schools. Most German Jews were fairly acculturated, and the children went to German schools, so they were kicked out of schools, and so the German Jews had to create schools basically on the fly. I mean, there were some Orthodox schools, but basically most German Jews went to public school, and now they were kicked out. And probably the same as regard other kinds of organizations. This is a sports blouse that was created for a Jewish sports organization. So let me ask you all this question. Why is there a Jewish star on it? Doug, I know you're going to say, let me know what you're thinking.
Well, to as a marker, as an insignia, but when you were just introducing it, it sounded like it may be just part of a team. Maybe there was another team that maybe had a Jewish star, but it was a different color or something.
Could be.
But anyway, when I saw it, what I thought was that for some reason it was required. That's what I was thinking when I saw it.
So my understanding, and I certainly could be wrong, is that it wasn't required. I mean, I don't know when they were actually required to wear Jewish stars, right? But I think they were yellow Jewish stars, if I'm not mistaken. But I think that this star here is a sign of pride.
Okay.
Because one of the things that, and we don't really talk about it a lot, but when the Jews were kicked out of German society, in Germany, many of them, returned to some aspect of Jewish life, and there was a kind of a revival of Jewish life, right? And in a kind of there was, I think this is when, or if this is not when, the Lehrhaus began. It was certainly became popular during this time. Lectures and classes and probably sports organizations and so on. And so there really was kind of a revival of Jewish life, and this is part of it. So I think it actually represents Jewish pride, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to show you other artifacts. So we have other opportunities to comment. So, okay, there we go. There's a close-up. All right. we're going to just move ahead a little bit. Okay, and we're going to go across the room here and look at this artifact here. This is a very cool artifact, this Torah scroll. And see, it is a Torah scroll. I won't lie to you. Not tonight anyway. But this has a really cool story to it. So let's see here. We can get a little better shot. There we go. Okay, so the story is pretty cool. So let's go backwards a little nicer. So this Torah scroll was in Hamburg, Germany, and on the night of Kristallnacht. So I should maybe let me tell you a little bit about Kristallnacht. So and then I'll explain what how this connects with this Torah scroll. So you know, things were escalating in Germany. Like I mentioned before, Hitler comes to power in 1933. There is the Nuremberg laws in 1935, and the pressure on the Jews to leave is increased, right? And an important stage in this pressure was Kristallnacht. Now, I assume you all have heard of it. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, what it was is the Nazis took basically it was a pretext. There was just before Kristallnacht in October 1938. The Nazis expelled Jews of Polish citizenship. So there were a lot of Jews in Germany who were from Poland or had Polish citizenship, and they were literally expelled across the border in the middle of the night. The child, the son, the teenage son of a couple that were expelled was a guy named Herschel Greenspan, and he went and he was in Paris, and he went to the German embassy, and he shot and ultimately killed one of the employees at the embassy. So the Nazis used this as a pretext for launching a countrywide pogrom, a countrywide violent riot against the Jewish population. So in that night, Kristallnacht, which I believe was November 9th and 10th, 1938, most of the synagogues were burned down. Many Jewish stores were looted. Jewish homes were vandalized. 90 Jewish men were killed, 90 Jews were killed, and 30,000 Jewish men were arrested. And then the Jewish community was forced to pay damages of millions of dollars, if I'm not mistaken, or millions of Reichsmarks. So that was Kristallnacht. So during Kristallnacht, a teacher, Seligman Bear Baumberger, from a rabbinic family, but he himself wasn't a rabbi, he was a teacher, a chemistry teacher, knew that the synagogue in Hamburg was being destroyed, and he ran into the synagogue and saved this Torah scroll, which is pretty amazing. Okay, and he later smuggled it to the United States, shortly, like 2 years later. However, he liked to say that while he was rescuing the Torah rescued him. And why is that? So at the moment that he was going to the synagogue and rescuing the Torah, the Gestapo, the German secret police, came to his apartment and tried to arrest him, like they arrested many other German Jewish men. But they couldn't find him because he was rescuing the Torah. And then he did a smart thing. He checked himself into a hospital. So they couldn't find him at all. And when things died down, he went home. And ultimately, he was able to arrange, through the help of friends and others, to come to the United States. He was able to get a position, I believe at Yeshiva University, or maybe in Yeshiva University High School, as a teacher. So this was a very hard thing to do, but some of the Jewish organizations did invite people from Germany. They couldn't invite a lot of people, but they invited some people. So he was able to come with his family. So it's kind of an amazing story.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing artifact. And I actually met his son, who came here, and he told me about how all these people were lobbying on his father's behalf, on his parents' behalf, really. So it's pretty amazing. Apparently Einstein wrote a letter or something. So it's kind of incredible that to get one family out needed that much firepower. Anyway. We're gonna go ahead a little bit. Okay. So that brings us up to November 1938. The war started. Okay, but I'll just maybe mention very quickly, people were trying to leave Germany. There was nowhere to go. The very famous, and I don't have an image here to show you, but I do want to mention very briefly the story of the St. Louis, especially because it connects to American history. So, um, uh, also leaving Hamburg, by the way, there was a ship called the St. Louis, okay, of the Hamburg America line. It was an ocean liner, and it left in May 1939 to come to Cuba. Okay, while it was underway, there was I guess it was a change in government in Cuba, whatever. These people had visas for Cuba. When they got to Cuba, the Cuban government said, we're not going to let you land unless you pay us another $500, something like that. And, this was a huge amount of money in those days. So most of the people couldn't land. And they tried to come to the United States. They, of course, telegraphed people, they radioed people. Nobody would let them in. The United States certainly would not let them in. Okay, this is in May 1939. Of course, it's a depression, right? There's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment. So why let in these 918 immigrants, right? 918 refugees who will take the jobs away from other people, okay? It's interesting how some of these themes continue. They never really go away. They just sort of resurface over and over again. Anyway, the ship was turned back and ultimately made its way to Belgium. And in Belgium, the passengers were distributed between 4 countries: England, Holland, France, and Belgium. And the 3 of those countries, all of those countries except for England, were occupied by the Nazis. So the people of the St. Louis, and France was a little bit different because the southern part wasn't occupied directly until later in the war. So many of the people in the St. Louis, not all of them, but I think at least half, were killed. And they were so close to really being free. So anyway, that's beginning in May 1939, the St. Louis. And September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. And during that year of 1939 and 1940, and Poland did not last very long. I mean, it put up a resistance, but it fell very quick, after a few weeks. And so during that year, 1939, 1940, the Germans established ghettos in the major Polish cities. So we're going to just look at a couple of images of the ghetto in Krakow. Anybody here been to Poland, by the way?
Twice.
Twice. Okay. Have you been to Krakow?
Yes, and Auschwitz and Birkenau.
Okay. So I may have to hand my microphone over to you. Although the truth of the matter is that going to those places today, as moving as it is, it's not the same as what it was, which is good. But anyway, let me show you, since you've been to Krakow, let me show you, and since this is the picture I have, a couple of images, I believe, from Krakow. So this is building the wall around the Krakow ghetto. So basically, there was a bad neighborhood in Krakow, I think, called Podgorze. Oops, let me go back here a little bit. All right, and I think we might, let me let it run because I think we might have a better shot in a second. Yeah, here we go. Podgorze. So it was basically a slum neighborhood on the other side of the river from Krakow, from the nice part of Krakow. And so the Jews were forced into that area, and they were forced to build the wall there. And they were walled in there. And that's what we're seeing here. Perhaps even more telling is the next picture, though, where it shows how the Jews were forced out of their homes, really at a moment's notice, and forced into the ghetto. And I believe it's Krakow as well, but I might be wrong. Let's take a look here. So take a look at this image here. Oops. Oh, stop. Oh, sorry. Okay. So, you look, it's winter, it's snowing, and people are taking their last possessions and they're being forced into this ghetto. Okay. And in the ghettos, I can tell you that, I mean, each ghetto was different. Okay, each ghetto had a different like administration. Generally speaking, there was a council of elders that the Nazis appointed that were forced to carry out the Nazis' commands. But you know, each one was different. Some were better, some were worse. I mean, ultimately, they all met the same fate, which was that the Jews in the ghettos were sent to forced labor, but then ultimately they were murdered, either in, you know, in killing actions in ditches in Eastern Europe, or sent to Auschwitz or other death camps. But you can take a look at the kind of the cruelty of all of these people being forced out, and literally like given an hour's notice. So it was pretty awful. And in the ghetto, there wasn't, generally speaking, there wasn't enough food. Generally speaking, there wasn't enough medical supplies. Generally speaking, it wasn't enough, for sure, not enough space, and filthy conditions. I'll tell you. So I know a little bit about the Warsaw Ghetto and a little bit about the ghetto in Łódź, or Łódź. So the ghetto in Łódź apparently was in such a bad neighborhood that there wasn't actually normal sewage facilities there, and they had to like carry out the refuse. They had like tanks that they had to carry out. They called them fecalistim, you know, the people who did it. It's disgusting, but you know, this is what, and in these ghettos, since they didn't have fuel to heat themselves, they would burn furniture, you know, and people would get sick and die. And I'm sure you've all seen pictures, and if you want, I can send you links, but you know, in the Warsaw Ghetto of starving children and starving people. And this was, on one hand, to sort of like a holding place to figure, while the Nazis figured out what to do with the Jews, and to use them for forced labor. And the other hand was also to demoralize the Jews, because part of the battle against the Jews was not only a physical battle, but it was also a spiritual battle, so to speak. So anyway, let me show you this. And part of ghettoization was also, of course, keeping people separate. They were forced to wear armbands. You're going to see one right now. Let's see if we can make this go a little faster. Yeah, here's the armband here. Okay, here we go. Okay, now, so the ghettos were established basically in 1939, basically in 1940. One thing that I neglected to mention, but I think it's important to mention, is that in August 1939, Germany made an agreement, a secret agreement. Maybe it wasn't so secret, but they made an agreement with the Soviet Union called the Non-Aggression Treaty. Are you guys familiar with this?
Mhm.
Okay, so
No.
I see. No? Okay, so let me tell you, it's incredible, actually. So basically, Germany and the Soviet Union agreed not to attack one another in case of war. And in case there was war, they agreed to split Poland down the middle, so that the western half of Poland would go to Germany and the eastern half of Poland would go to the Soviet Union.
What year was this?
This is in June 19, well, the agreement was made in August 1939. So right before Germany invaded Poland. And in fact, it was like a week before Germany, or 8 days before Germany invaded Poland. So it's, you know, it's one of those like horrific things that maybe if Stalin hadn't made that agreement, maybe the war wouldn't have started. But it happened. The agreement happened, and the war proceeded, and Poland was invaded. However, this only meant to buy time for Germany, because in June, I believe June 22nd, 1941, they launched a campaign called Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. So I just want to show you, and I'll just tell you. So basically what they did was the German armies penetrated deep into the Soviet Union, almost to the gates of Moscow. I believe that they came to the gates of Leningrad. Okay. I just want to show you one of the posters from that period. This is a pretty amazing and disturbing poster. So can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me what you see. I'm gonna drink some tea while you talk.
The devil.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the devil. Okay. So tell me about this devil.
Well, he's got Russian symbols on his arm and Jewish symbols as well. Russian and
Yeah.
Jewish. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So he's got Soviet symbols or communist symbols. He's got the hammer and sickle, right? But he's got payas, right? And he's got a yarmulke. And what's he doing?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out.
Like, you know what? It might
He's
come in a little
destroying the
closer.
town.
Oh,
Let me
he's
see if it-
destroying. Yeah, that's a smokestack. I was trying to figure out what it was that he's like destroying the industry and the town itself.
Yeah,
Everything.
he's destroying everything. So think about it. The propaganda, what's the propaganda message here?
They're coming after you, the Jews and the Russians.
The Jews and the communists.
And
The
the
Jews and the
communists.
communists. And actually
Right.
the Jews and the communists are the same. What do they call it? The Judeo-Bolshevik, okay, I'm mispronouncing, but in any event, that they wanted people to associate the Jews and the communists with each other. So,
and the red, right? The red of communism.
and the red of horror and the red of destruction, absolute, all of these things together. Excellent, excellent. So this is kind of propaganda that the Germans are spreading among the Ukrainians and the Lithuanians and the other people who, by the way, were more than happy to welcome the Germans coming in because they hated the communists so much, right? Because these countries had been or wanted to be independent of the Soviet Union, and they didn't want communism. And so this was a very convincing argument to say, well, the Jews and the communists are the same, and they're destroying everything. So join us in battle against them. So this kind of thinking led to a tremendous slaughter of the Jewish population. About 1.5 to 2 million Jews were killed in the Soviet Union by German detachments called Einsatzgruppen. And basically what they did was they would go to the outskirts of a town and they would force the Jews or the local population to dig a ditch, and they'd make the Jews line up in the ditch and they'd shoot them. And then they get another row of Jews and shoot them, and another. And there's actually a Catholic priest named Father Patrick Dubois who was involved in trying to locate these places and commemorate them. So he's an interesting guy. So that was like one stage in the Holocaust. All right, we had the ghettoization, and here we call this the Holocaust by bullets. Okay, so we're just going to go on and let's take a look at what's next here. But this is a close-up. Sorry, I should have showed this to you before. It's worth looking at it again.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? These things do matter. Okay. This is the one that I should have shown you. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Now, let's talk a minute. There were people who survived the Holocaust. Most people did not survive, right? Most people could not survive. However, there were a few means of survival. One means of survival was by fleeing into the Soviet Union. So those people who were able to get across the San River and to flee into the Soviet Union and to get beyond the German lines, they were able to survive. A lot of them were arrested and sent into labor camps, forced labor camps, but in 1943, I believe, they were released and they were able to basically to stay in the Soviet Union for the duration of the war. Some people were sent to labor camps in Germany, and even though they worked very hard, some of those people were able to survive, but other people went into hiding. And this is actually kind of, I know it sucks, you'll see, but I want to talk about this. So these socks, let's see, I think it's going to get a close-up. So you all know the story of Anne Frank, right? So this is a little bit similar. So Ruth Gruner was one of our speakers at the museum, a survivor who spoke about her experiences. But as a child in Lvov, in the city of Lvov, her parents owned a candy store, and they were apparently very nice people and very generous people, and built up a lot of goodwill. They went into hiding. Her parents hid separately from Ruth. Ruth hid with a couple of different Polish families, and these are the socks that she wore when she was in hiding. Hiding was not so easy. If the coast was clear, she was able to come out, but when the coast was not clear, she had to hide in a basket. And the apartment that she hid in had been searched, or had been visited at least by the Nazis, by the Gestapo. So it was not an easy thing to do. And she's an incredible person. So she told me the story. I don't know how much time do I have? Do we have a hard stop at 7, or could I have a few more minutes?
As far as I'm concerned, it can go on, but I don't know.
So that's up to the group. So is there anyone who can't go on? If we were to go to about 10 after, a quarter after, is there anyone who would need to leave?
No.
Trying to see everyone. I think we're good.
Okay, super. Super, thank you. And you know what? I mean, we might not even go all the way to 7:10, but okay. Anyway, so it's an incredible story. So it happens that actually she survived, and she became a speaker at the museum, Ruth Gruner, and her parents survived. So as the war is ending, I guess she was able to get back together with her parents, but things were still going on. They're still fighting in the street. And she told me the story that her father was walking in Lvov, and he saw a crowd of people. So he went to see what was going on. He went into the crowd of people, and in the middle of the crowd, there was a German tank that was hit, that was, on fire or damaged. And there was a wounded German soldier there, and they were taunting him and starting to beat him up, the crowd. And so Ruth Gruner's father went and took the soldier and took him to the hospital, which to me is like an incredible act of Gemilut Chasadim, even though these people were trying to kill them. Ultimately, the humane thing to do was the right thing to do. And that's what he did. And to me, I don't know, I always remember that story as it's very inspiring to me. She unfortunately passed away a couple months ago. We just had, was it 2 weeks ago, her shloshim. Very special person, Ruth Gruner. All right, anyway, let me show you a couple more things. Okay, so we had an exhibit, it's closed now, but an exhibit about Auschwitz, which was a really good exhibit. And this is an artifact from that exhibit. And let's just talk about it and try to unpack it and why we're using it for this tour. So anybody want to tell me what it is and why we would be using this artifact? And I know, Julie, you probably, since you were at Auschwitz, you probably have some ideas about it also, especially.
Well, it's a boot with a sock in it.
Yeah, it's actually just a shoe.
And-
it's a child's shoe. You can't really tell this, but
Oh,
it really is a child's shoe. Yeah. Go ahead.
so in different rooms, there were piles and piles of shoes, piles and piles of suitcases with names on them, piles of combs and brushes and toiletries. It was just amazing.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to just say, just for everybody's, so Auschwitz was one of 6 death camps. So basically the Nazis had a huge network of labor camps, concentration camps, ghettos, death camps. Okay, the death camps, there were 6 major death camps. One of those camps, which was both a death camp and also served as basically a kind of a clearinghouse for other labor camps, was Auschwitz. Auschwitz had 3 major camps and a bunch of minor camps. So basically, about 1 million people were sent to Auschwitz II, which is also called Birkenau. And of that million people who were sent there, about 900,000 were murdered in gas chambers, right? So they were sent on trains, they would get off the train, right? Their stuff was taken from them, right? That they brought their suitcases, right? They brought their clothes, they brought whatever they could bring, right? It was taken from them. They were told to strip, right? They were led to these gas chambers. They didn't know what they were. They thought they were showers. They were told they were showers. They were told to strip. They took their clothes off. They forced them into the gas chamber. They dropped in a pesticide called Zyklon B. And within about a half hour, they were dead, right? And they would shove in like hundreds of people into these gas chambers, and then they would burn the bodies. It's really awful. That is what they did. And what they would do is they would take all of these clothes and these shoes and these, kitchenwares, and they would send them to Germany. They had these warehouses in Birkenau called Canada, because Canada is a place of wealth, of resources, right? So they would collect everything in Canada in these warehouses. They had Jewish slave laborers that would sort everything, and they would send it to Germany. And the stuff that they weren't able to send to Germany is the stuff that Julie saw in these cases in the Auschwitz Museum, right? Which is still thousands of suitcases and eyeglasses and combs and shoes and hair. So it's really something else and really disturbing, actually. But let's talk about this shoe for a second. So this was a child's shoe, and it's kind of, I think, unusual in that the sock is still in it. So it makes you wonder, like, what's going on exactly? Like, what was the last moment? Could it have been that the mother, went into the gas chamber, and before, when she was disrobing, she took the child's shoes off and the socks, and she tucked the sock into the shoe so that when they were done with the shower, they could retrieve their clothes? Or was it yanked off the kid's foot? I don't know. It's one of those things where it's such an ordinary artifact, and yet it's kind of compelling. Also, look at how worn it is. Now, okay, admittedly, it's 75 years old, but it was obviously pretty worn when they got to Auschwitz. Let's see. Let me let it play because you can see a little bit more. It goes around, I think. Yeah, so we see a little bit more. You can see how it's that they have the little metal thing in the front, try to give it a little bit more life. It also is that there was a human being that occupied this shoe.
Right.
So anyway. I think I have one or two more artifacts. Actually, I have a couple more artifacts to show you. Okay, and I am keeping track on the time. Okay. So I mentioned that at Auschwitz, one of the camps. Okay, so there are three major camps. Auschwitz I, which was essentially a prison camp. Auschwitz, here we go. Auschwitz II, which was Birkenau, which was essentially a death camp, and then Auschwitz III, which was called Monowitz or Buna, which was a labor camp, and where they believed that they were producing synthetic rubber, right, for the German war effort. So I know it's late, so I'm not going to ask you a million questions on this, but I want to just point out that this artifact here is a handmade comb, like a little hair comb. And actually, if we go back, you can see how small it is. Okay, you can't even see how small it is, but basically it's like maybe even 2 inches, if that, 2 inches long. It's very, very small. But this was made by a young woman named Ruth Grunberger. And she was in the labor, sorry about that. She was in the labor camp at Auschwitz. And she, when people were sent to Auschwitz, the people who weren't killed right away, who were sorted, when you went to Auschwitz, there was Mengele or some other SS officer who would sort people, right? That on one side you went to the crematoria and to the gas chamber, and the other side you went to the labor camp. So yeah, so and if you went to the labor camp, they would shave your hair. They'd take your clothes, they'd give you like this prison uniform, and they'd shave your hair, all of your hair. So she was sent to the labor camp. Her hair was shaved, but she had hope. She had hope that she would survive, and she made this comb as a kind of a proof to herself, a testament to herself that she would survive. And I actually met her. Her daughter is a docent at the museum, and it's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
Such a small little thing.
How was she able? Like, I'm so curious about what the materials were. It almost looks like spoons.
They're so small. They're literally like matchsticks.
And how did she put this together? I mean, it almost looks like, is it soldered together?
It looks like it's soldered. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it is solder, if the whole thing is solder, because it looks like it, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised, and that would also be soft enough to be easily, manipulated. It's a good question. You know what?
She didn't say how she made it.
No, but I can ask her daughter. I'm in touch with her daughter. Actually, she wrote she and other family members just recently wrote a memoir, which I reviewed for them. So I can ask her daughter, or I could ask her, but I know her daughter better. I can ask her how she made it. It's a good question, actually. And I'm glad you asked that, because nobody's asked me that question before. So thank you. Okay, I want to just show you guys a couple more things. I'm going to move this on a little bit.
I'm sorry, how old was she at the time?
I believe she was 14. And by the way, so basically towards the end of her time at Auschwitz, the Nazis, the guards said, okay, we need some volunteers to go on a special mission. So I have to tell you, this is an amazing story. There is this concept called camp sisters. And what does that mean? That means that it usually happened with women, but you could have something similar with men also, that women who maybe were related or not related, but basically buddied up together in Auschwitz and other kinds of camps like this, and helped one another and supported one another and looked out for one another. And Ruth Grunberger and her real sister and three other women made a small group together, and they did everything together, and they actually all survived together. So towards the end of the war, the Nazis asked for volunteers to go on a special some sort of special mission. It ended up being like a death march, zigzagging across Germany. They ended up, as the war ended, they ended up on the border of Denmark, of all places, and they basically had walked a lot of the way from Auschwitz in bad weather. She and her sister and the other women were taken to Sweden, where they recovered. So that's an incredible story. So thank you for asking about that. Okay, just two other things really quickly. Rosa Rabba was one of the women who was involved in the uprising in Auschwitz in 1944. I believe it was in August 44. It's towards the end of the time that Auschwitz. I believe this is her, if I'm not mistaken. And she was involved, again, if I'm not mistaken, in smuggling gunpowder from Auschwitz III, from Monowitz into Birkenau. And with that gunpowder, they were able to blow up the, I believe it was the Sonderkommando, but the people who were running the gas chambers in the crematorium, the Jewish prisoners who were forced to run it, were able to blow up one of the gas chambers, which is kind of an amazing thing. They were all killed immediately afterwards, of course, but it was at least a stop. And shortly afterwards, actually, as the war was coming to an end, the Nazis stopped killing people there. It was pretty late because they had already killed most of European Jewry. but nevertheless, it was a tremendous act of heroism. So Rosa Rabota is her name. And I just want to show you, let's see here. That's it. Chazak ve'amatz, be strong and have courage. Last message that she sent before execution, January 6, 1945. So you know what? We know that the Soviets liberated Auschwitz, I believe, in January 27th, 1945. So this was a few weeks before Auschwitz was liberated, and people were already leaving the camp. Right, and I have one more artifact, I believe. Okay, yeah. So I mentioned that Auschwitz was liberated in January 27th, 1945 by the Soviets. And if we were to look at a map of Europe, you'd see that at this time, D-Day was June 6th, 1944. The American forces landed in France, and they make their way towards Germany. The American forces and the German forces meet in April and May 1945 in Germany, and I believe it's May 7th at Germany, or May 8th is the Victory over Europe Day, when Germany surrenders. So for the people who survived, all right, especially the people who were still in the concentration camps or the death camps, it was a very bittersweet moment, because they were free because Germany surrendered, but then they realized, so up until that point, all of their energy, or their mental energy, was, how am I going to stay alive? What's going to keep me till the next day, right? Once Germany was defeated, they had an opportunity to say, okay, what happened to my family? What happened to my loved ones, right? This was a very, very, what happened to my dignity? These people were living in rags and in filth up until this point. So this is a really cool artifact. This is a dress that Thea Gottesman, who I believe was in, I forget which camp she was in. I believe it was in Buchenwald or Bergen-Belsen. In any event, she was in one of the camps. The American soldiers, so it was probably in Buchenwald. The American soldiers gave her this fabric, and she made a dress because she only had a uniform before, one of these, and she actually took the fabric of the uniform, which you'll see in a second, and made a carrying bag for it. But this was one of the first acts of becoming a person again, of regaining her personhood. This is what people look like with the uniforms on, and you can see how emaciated this person is. So kind of a typical vision, typical view. But in any event, this dress was really important for her, and she kept it and donated it to the museum as a memory, a souvenir of her liberation, but of also regaining herself, right? And like I say, becoming a person again. So I think that that's all I have to show you. Let's take a look and see. Yeah, we'll just let it play a little bit more. That's a picture of Thea Gottesman actually here in the background there. It's a picture of her over here. Yeah. And that's that basically brings us the history of the Holocaust. Now, the other thing I should say, which is very, very important, is that, so these people who survived the Holocaust, so first of all, most people didn't survive, but the ones who did survive, so many of those survivors, they were in DP camps, ultimately went to Israel, came to the United States, went to other Western countries, Australia or South Africa, New Zealand, well, not so much New Zealand, but certainly United States, Canada, Australia, England. And what's amazing about these people, first of all, that after going through such a traumatic experience, many of them, not all of them, many of them were able to rebuild their lives. And not only that, but many of them became very active in the Jewish community and really were a shot in the arm, certainly for American Jewry, and I think for Israeli Jewry too, that they brought those qualities that enabled them to survive, the resourcefulness and determination and the hope that motivated them, they were also able to share some of that with the Jewish community, so that Jewish life in these different places had a revival, and I would say across the board, because of these amazing people. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you for listening to me. If you have any if we have time for questions, I'd be happy to try to answer questions, or we'd be happy to have your comments.
Yeah, let's definitely turn off the screen share so that we can see everyone again.
Got it.
And and so I think we do have a little bit of time if there's some specific questions, things that you'd like to hear a little bit more about. So please feel free. It's such a vast subject, and it's so intense, and it can be approached from so many different angles, and it's really something that I think for us to continue to learn about year after year, month after month, for the rest of our lives, because we owe it to those who went through the experience as our kin, but also because we owe it to the future, and to the future generations, to understand more and more deeply what took place, so that we can make sure it doesn't, as it doesn't happen again, but or just to continue to stem the tide of othering, and of hatred of others that continues in our world. In the next class, we're going to be talking more about anti-Semitism in general, some of the tropes that led up to the Holocaust, but what continue in our world today, and the way in which we've seen a spike and a rise in anti-Semitic acts in recent years, in Europe especially, but in America as well. So that's where we're headed from here. And again, just want to make some space if you have some questions or comments.
If I do want to hear comments or questions. One thing I didn't talk about a lot, and I think is very important, is this idea of Jewish resistance. There was all kinds of resistance, from obviously armed resistance, but also helping one another, helping rescue people, taking care of one another, showing humanity. So I think, we often don't talk about those things, but I think those are really important also. And, the story is a depressing story, but if we see some where people, where people did help one another, or where people rescued one another, I think there's places where we could draw inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I have a question. Kind of as a backstory to this question is, my mother's family is Jewish. I don't know much about them. She was estranged from them for most of my life, but I do know that they came from Austria. Don't know exactly when. But do you think the Holocaust has a big play, I guess, or part in why a lot of people don't talk about their heritage anymore? Because even I've connected with some, I think, like second cousins over the last few years on my mother's side, and I started asking questions. I just want to know more about my family and my heritage, where they come from. And I was basically told not to ask, and especially don't ask certain family members.
Are your family members survivors?
I don't know. From what I do know is that some of them are, but I don't know really anything. My mother didn't talk about, I didn't know my mother was Jewish until I was an adult.
Well, I can tell you a few thoughts, right? And it's just really thoughts. So take it at that. First of all, for some people, listen, for everybody, but for some people, hiding their identity, they started hiding in the Holocaust, and they figured that it would never be safe to reveal themselves as Jewish. And so they took on, I don't really understand the psychology, but this is definitely, it happened with some people. There are people in Poland who will find out that I mean, Rabbi Shudrak, who's the chief rabbi of Poland, has a story about these two skinheads that he was friendly with that were interested in Judaism, and one of them they were dating one another, and one of them converted, against the objections of his parents, and then the other one converted against the objections of her parents. And why did the parents object? Well, it turned out that the parents on both sides were actually Jewish, but they were hiding it all along. And sometimes what people experienced, the people who went through the Holocaust could experience awful things that they didn't really want to share. So that's part of it too. Or I can tell you, I can't tell you about, I don't have like a Holocaust story, but like, for example, my mother's uncle was a criminal. All right. Who was like, I think he was wanted by the FBI or something for embezzlement or something. And, my mother was embarrassed by that. I think it's funny, but listen, if somebody was doing something wrong or bad, and there were people who did bad things. I'm not saying that your family did, but I can see that there are so many reasons not to want to divulge things. Can I tell you one more story? I'm sorry. Okay. I was teaching a Hebrew school class, and one of the sessions was that people would bring in like their grandparents. So somebody brought in their grandmother, and the grandmother looks around like this and like this, and she says, well, I never told this to anybody before, but the reason we came to America, that my parents came to America, is that my uncle killed somebody in Ukraine, and we had to get out. And we never told anybody because we thought we'd be deported back to America. Back to Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
So
my other thought or question on that was the fact that, I don't know if just maybe because my mother didn't raise me and my siblings in the Jewish faith, that maybe they didn't feel comfortable talking to us about this, because they were, my whole extended family on my mother's side, on her mother's side, is Jewish and were raised in the Jewish faith. So I didn't know if maybe it's because they technically consider us outsiders.
What it sounds like it could be. It sounds like that they were uncomfortable, or maybe, what another thing is that maybe, and I don't know your mother or anything, but maybe she didn't have a good relationship with her mother or her father, and her rejection of Judaism or Jewish identity was part of that somehow.
Okay.
That's,
because I didn't know if it was. Yeah, because I didn't know if it's it's something else other families experience because of the Holocaust, or
I think it has, certainly, that people hide their Jewish identity. That's definitely, I've heard that. I'm sure, Kaya, I'm sure you've heard that as well.
Yes, I have definitely heard that, for sure. But I'd also just, that the trauma involved in the experience, if they've gone through the Shoah, the Holocaust, as survivors, that it leads to all kinds of different responses, including completely walking away from their Jewish lives, or not wanting to ever recount those experiences because of the profound, trauma of it. And so kind of starting a new life, we're basically blocking out anything that took place and never speaking about it. And I've met many children of survivors and grandchildren of survivors who said that their mother or grandmother or whoever it was that was a survivor never spoke about what took place, until the end of their life, until, maybe to a particular favorite grandchild, in the last month of their lives, finally spoke about what took place. So, we're dealing with profound trauma. If there are survivors in your family, then there's a story of trauma in the family, and how that gets played out is going to be unique and different for every family.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. So I want to thank you, Paul. I think our time is running out, so much for taking us through that.
My pleasure.
A very unique
you.
and new way to explore some of the history and the stories through the stories that the museum has pulled together through these artifacts. Before we go, I wanted to offer a prayer. I just feel that this is holy work, it's sacred work, telling these stories, and lifting up these souls, bringing them into our hearts, and bringing this story into ourselves is a powerful thing, and it's a sacred thing. So I want to offer a prayer before we close. So this is a memorial prayer. I'm going to recite it in Hebrew, and then I'll recite it in English. Yizkor Elohim et nishmot kol acheinu b'nei Yisrael, shemasru et nafsham al kiddush Hashem, v'et ha'anashim, nashim v'taf, shenechneku v'shenisrafu v'shenehargu b'shoah, ba'avor she'anu mitpalalim ba'ad hazkarat nishmatam. Ana, yishma b'chayenu, hed gvuratam u'mesirutam, v'yera'eh b'ma'asenu tohar libam, v'tiyena nafshotehem tzurot b'tzor ha'chayim, v'tihi menuchatam kavod, sovas machot et panecha ne'imot b'yamincha netzach. Amen.
Amen.
May God remember the souls of all of those people who lost their lives, who lost their lifetimes, the men, the women, and the children who were slaughtered, burned, and killed in the Holocaust. In their memory, we pray. May our lives reflect a measure of their bravery, dedication, and purity of soul. May their souls be bound up in the bond of life. May they be remembered with honor, and may they rest in peace alongside your right hand forever. Amen.
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 So, a lot to take in, and I encourage you to continue learning. And I did send a bunch of links, I think, to you in the last email. There's just so much available now online that you can continue to explore the subject. And we will meet again in, I think, 3 weeks. It's the first week in December. And it'll be after Hanukkah, after Thanksgiving, after Hanukkah, to talk more about anti-Semitism in general, and also in particular in our time. So thank you once again, Paul, and thank you everyone for.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you for
You're
the
welcome.
link in advance.
Sure.
That was
Yeah.
helpful.
Yes.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
No, thank you.